at you from sunny San Francisco. Just kidding, I'm in my office. Alright, so today we're looking at avant-garde art of the early 20th century. We're going to discuss several of the modern styles, from Fauvism to Expressionism and Cubism, as well as Futurism and an unusual movement called Dada. Some of the questions to consider this week. How do the various modern isms relate to the changes in society, technology, art, and politics in the early 20th century? Why is the modern label typically reserved for art made by artists in Europe and North America, even though those artists were influenced by African and Asian aesthetics? And finally, who decides what art is or isn't? Some of the terms to know and use include abstraction, avant-garde, Fauvism, Expressionism, Cubism, Futurism, tabula rasa, Dada, and ready-made art. Let's start by defining avant-garde. So avant-garde is distinct from modern. It's a French military term in terms of its etymology or its origin. It literally means advanced guard or vanguard. It refers to new, unusual, and often experimental art or ideas, so you might hear this term applied to literature or music or something else. Key to its newness is a combination of high and low forms of art. So a high form of art would be painting, drawing, sculpture, those kinds of traditional forms of art. And low forms of art would be popular or everyday forms of art. So something that's mass produced or something that is part of popular culture. So we might think of those avant-garde artists we're looking at today as part of a war as well, a war against tradition, a war of progressive and new ways of looking that respond to modern life and modern warfare. There were many developments that radically changed the way that we see and experience the world in the early 20th century. When the 20th century arrived, artists had every reason to believe that they were entering a totally new and unique modern age. Philosophers like Henri Bergson were expanding and collapsing our concept of time, and Sigmund Freud's theories were opening new paths to uncharted segments of the human mind. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century brought modern conveyances in its wake, like cars, the airplane, and the electric elevator, which went hand in hand with steel and glass construction and the birth of the skyscraper. The skyscraper would, of course, be the emblem of the modern city. Life, in other words, had never been moving faster. Another modern invention is film, something that captured the essence of modern life. This film shows downtown New York, Broadway to be exact. So how were artists responding to this new modern world in painting and drawing? One way is by abstraction, the attempt to distill art's most basic underlying forms from nature. One way is through abstraction, the attempt to distill art's most basic underlying forms from nature. This painting by Henri Matisse, called Le Bonheur de Vivre, or The Joy of Life, is a great example of Fauvism, which is a painting style associated with Matisse's work. It derives from a French term, fauve, which means wild beasts. And it's an early 20th century style characterized by bold, unnatural, and arbitrary color. So here, color is really key. And it's not just any color, it's this bold, somewhat unnatural and arbitrary color. According to Matisse, quote, "Exactitude is not truth." In other words, reproducing the world as it really looks is not reproducing it truthfully. To reproduce the world truthfully, you need to incorporate the emotions and feelings of the world, and you can do that using color. The first exhibit of Fauvism was at the Salon d'Automne in 1905. The Salon d'Automne, or Salon of Autumn, was an exhibition meant to contrast with the official Paris Salon in the spring. The Salon d'Automne instead featured more experimental avant-garde work, like that of Matisse. One of the pieces featured was this painting by Matisse on the left called Woman with a Hat. It's a portrait of his wife, Amélie Matisse, and we can see that he's used arbitrary color here. We wouldn't think that his wife's face was actually green, for example. And we wouldn't think that the background really had splotches of green, pink, and lavender like it does. Color is exaggerated and used instead for expressive effect, rather than to describe something exactly as it appears in real life. Also included in the Salon d'Automne of 1905 was this painting by André Derain called Le Séchage des Voiles, or the drying sails, which is an image of a seaport with boats. We can see visible brushstrokes and bright, vivid color. Derain also left part of the canvas raw and unpainted, which was pretty much unheard of at the time. Cubism is another early 20th century art movement. Like Fauvism, Cubism abstracted what's seen in the world. Cubist artists like Pablo Picasso fractured their forms and presented objects as if seen from multiple perspectives all at the same time. Here we're looking at Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, or The Ladies of Avignon Street. This is a painting of prostitutes, essentially. So you can see how in some areas we're looking at the women as if frontally, like you look at the eye here and it looks as if she's looking at us from the front, although the rest of the face is in profile, as if seen from the side. So it's that combination of different perspectives seen simultaneously, all at once, that defines this kind of Cubist style, as well as these kind of angular fractured forms. You may have seen the stand-up special on Netflix by Hannah Gadsby called Nanette. It came out a couple years ago. In that special, she's talking a lot about Picasso and a lot about Cubism in particular, and whether or not the contributions of Picasso and Cubism are really so important to art history that we can ignore some of the other stuff that we know about Picasso and his life. The stylization and distortion of Picasso's groundbreaking painting, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, came from African art. Picasso had first seen African art when, in 1907, he visited the Ethnographic Museum in Paris. He also collected African masks and sculptures and prized these objects for the way that they simplified and abstracted the human form. However, he totally disregarded the original context and purpose of these African objects and used them only for their formal aspects. In other words, just for the way that they looked and not for what they meant. He would also downplay the influence of African art on his own work, saying in 1920, "I have already said there is no more I can tell you about art nègre," in other words, about black art. And if you're interested, you can check out this link to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and see some of the other examples of African masks from specifically the region of the Congo, which have been compared to some of the forms in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Emerging from a Cubist style, Marcel Duchamp provoked a lot of negative responses when he showed his work Nude Descending a Staircase at an exhibit in New York in 1912. It was mocked and even called an explosion in a shingles factory. Duchamp will be important when we talk about the Dada art movement in a little bit.